This is Antithesis, your underground academic radio where the focus is on you. For those that are in the thick of it today, we know what you are living through. And for those that chose or were forced onto a different path, we know what it costs. We're here to be your companion and to help you reorient your compass a bit, to help make sense of it all. Thanks for being here. The opinions expressed here are my own and do not reflect those of my employer or any entity professionally affiliated with me. Topics in these podcasts will be familiar to many, if not all, within the academic and scientific communities, within institutions, industries, and employers of all kinds. Some of these topics may be of a highly sensitive nature to certain listeners, particularly those that have experienced or are experiencing them, and could trigger some emotions that are upsetting or distressing. I've created this space to speak openly about these topics with the broader goal of helping individuals cope, adjust, and adapt constructively to the many challenges at hand. With that said, thank you for joining me. Antithesis, Episode 4, Prizes. Welcome everyone to this latest episode. Over the past few weeks, it has been all about prizes in science, and of course other disciplines. More specifically, that big one that near everyone in the world, scientific or not, will know by name. So it seems fitting to at least scratch the surface of this topic today. Let's go back in time to January 2006, as I began having the fortune and often consequent tribulations of interviewing for faculty positions at a handful of large research universities, some in the West, some in the Midwest, and some in the East. And today, as a prelude to the heart of this episode, I will share with you one in particular. In fact, the very first, in January 2006. How will mathematical modeling win you the Nobel Prize? As I surveyed the faculty hiring committee panel, and particularly the individual that inquired this of me, it was only the dire circumstance itself that held my jaw from bouncing off the floor, basically. I thought to myself, do I lie to them and bestow inflated virtues and hollow promises about mathematical modeling and computational modeling? Maybe something to the effect of the power to be psychic, to massively predict biological outcomes from the minuscule to the sublime. No doubt, to include the curing of cancer. To get this job, do I take it that far? Or do I merely state the simple fact that using a computer to apply some equations toward modeling components of a biological and enzymatic system to learn more about its behavior is really no different than any experimental tool that we use on our lab benches? Do I state this truth and risk not getting a job offer? Because it's just too simple, too real, and basically too damned honest, or plainly so factual just to end up sounding naive? And most, if not all listeners tuning into this episode who are never academics, you can also face this kind of question, or at least a sentiment like that when you interview for a job. Though it's difficult for even myself to discern, well, what would parallel a Nobel Prize as an equivalent mark to achieve in one's workplace? Maybe we just chalk it up to a quote like, help this company increase its bottom line by 500% in a few years, or something to this effect. For better or for worse, how did I handle that question? I told the committee the truth. I said, it is a tool, like other lab equipment and processes. As I stood there thinking about this, I just really had to reflect on what is it that I really want. I said, my goal was not directed at winning a Nobel Prize in any way or any prize. But I wanted to run a fantastic research program, garner funding that I could sustain, bring a unique view and approach that combines mostly experimental biology with some facets of computational biology. But also, I was prepared to make a mark in the undergraduate and graduate classroom and perform service to my department and university if and when necessary. Yeah, folks, we'll talk more about the whole teaching part in this series, just not today. The faculty member that posed this question to me, how will mathematical modeling win you the Nobel Prize? Hearing my response, said with a smile, a very wry smile, oh, this is just a hypothetical question. Of all the lessons I learned from this on day one in furthering my pursuit of continuing an academic career, this was huge. If any of you are familiar with the movie Apocalypse Now, the line by Marlon Brando's character of Colonel Kurtz, not too far from the end of the movie, quote, I realized that I was shot, like I was shot with a diamond. And just how he says it, a diamond bullet right through my forehead. And if some of you know the scene, if some of you don't, this is literally in that moment how I felt. This was not one of those universities on a coast. This was not an Ivy. And to be straight from here on out, to me, it never needed to be. For all of you that have experienced the quote unquote faculty interview experience or are or will be going through it, for most, you just want to find a home. But the fact of the matter was, in this very moment, it didn't matter one bit where I was. It was the tone and the attitude. Am I being taken seriously or am I being mocked? It was the impossibility of determining what really mattered with any of the dozen and a half people sitting there before me. And from that point, I recall having one faculty member telling me, "My system is just way too complicated to get any valuable information from what you are suggesting by using computational modeling." And at that moment, I began a short course breaking down a part of their system on the chalkboard behind me, each set of reactions, their variables, their parameters, leaving some space for unknowns. And always being able to account for, hey, what is truly known about what they're studying and what could or should be reasonable, and what parts are simply black boxes. In those moments, I became the defender of this hybrid world of experimental and computational biology and interdisciplinary science in front of an audience that seemed way more skeptical and even more aggressive than appreciative. Just prior to this meeting, I'd given my seminar, my first faculty candidate seminar, and I had included too much. Folks, so much to cover on this, but I'll give you some gist right here. If you feel like you're having to fight for your life by presenting too much, then you're already behind. The head of the search committee told me after my seminar and before the chalk talk, quote, some people were falling asleep during your seminar. I replied to that individual politely, I guess I'll take it as a positive that everyone else stayed awake. And what was the outcome of my first faculty job visit interview? Rejection. But I returned home from my interview and cut a third of my presentation out. I also had an entirely different perspective of what I was dealing with and a further reinforcement into my own views on that word, prize. Victor Ambros and Gary Ruvkin are the winners of the 2024 Prize in Physiology or Medicine, both postdoctoral fellows in Robert Horowitz's lab at MIT. Late 80s is when they started. He himself was also Nobel Prize winner along with Sidney Brenner and John Stolsten. So for non-biologists, their work was in a tiny roundworm called Caenorhabditis elegans, what we call C. elegans. And they focused particularly on development and the monumental effort of tracing, for instance, the generation of every single cell from a fertilized egg all the way to the adult worm. And that's its own conversation, but an amazing system. A transparent worm, you could sit and study cells and you could put proteins inside that would glow and you could trace these things and track and do genetics. So just an amazing small organism to study so many things about biochemistry and development. The following words are quoted directly from the press release on this shared prize awarded by the Nobel Committee. The published results were initially met with almost deafening silence from the scientific community. Although the results were interesting, the unusual mechanism of gene regulation was considered a peculiarity of C. elegans, likely irrelevant to humans and other more complex animals. So scientists are not listening to this. I mean, hey man, if it's not relevant to humans, it doesn't matter. That perception changed in 2000. So more than a decade later, maybe a decade and a half, when Ruvkin's group, so one of these winners, well, they found a different version of what they're calling the microRNAs. So that was essentially what they discovered, these tiny little RNA molecules that could have a really highly impactful effect on development of these worms. Well, guess what? It's highly conserved and present throughout the animal kingdom. Humans have this. So now we're special, we're relevant, and we're important. The point of bringing this up is the fact that if you start in anything other than humans, it's not going to be as special. It's not going to be out in the forefront. And that's really where we're beginning today. So these two gentlemen won the Nobel for Medicine or Physiology this year. Let's go back to 2020. Dr. Katalin Karikó. She won a shared part of the Nobel Prize for mRNAs and using mRNAs in vaccines, which was huge for COVID vaccine development and what we have experienced and what saved thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of lives to be able to be vaccinated and protected from COVID. There was an excellent interview published by the National Academy of Sciences in their quote unquote Issues in Science and Technology free online publication. I'll provide the link in the description of this episode so you can check it out. There are so many interviews of her since she won her Nobel, but I can't emphasize enough how important it is for so many of you, especially those embroiled in research endeavors, to read this article in particular. But here, I want to share some select quotes from Dr. Karikó. So here are some direct quotes. There was an article in the Harvard Business Review that described how there's a center where the money and the prestige are. And if you are not there, you are in the periphery, like me, and can get lost. And the article said, the only benefit you have in the periphery is the freedom that you are doing what you think is important. I did not pay attention to what others are doing in terms of getting promotions and grants. So that's what I tell the students. Don't compare yourself to others. If I would have compared myself, I would have left the whole field a long time ago. But if your focus is always the science, I want to understand this biological mechanism, you never get disappointed. not even when somebody else publishes something about what you were investigating, because you want to understand, and that person contributed to the knowledge. Everybody starts by focusing on science, and somehow they shift to, oh, we should do more experiments, we need more people, so we need more money. They start to write grants, and more people come to work in the lab. Now those people have to publish to get their PhDs. Then you are submitting more and more grant applications because you have to keep the lab running, and your promotion is coming up, and your tenure. And the goal has now become that. And performing experiments becomes a tool to reach that, not a tool for understanding. And folks, episodes 1 and 2 here, and even 3. Now, reading these words for Dr. Kaitiko, and for those unfamiliar, someone who faced every possible struggle as she was on the academic track, including demotion, removal of laboratory space, and rejection at every turn. A key question every one of us needs to reflect upon is our love for what we do, what we pursue, and what we want to achieve so strong as to do it without needing the gleaming vision of any prize, but merely to achieve the dream of simply doing? While prizes are so heavily featured and can be singularly simple to point out whomever is or are deemed the best of the best according to respective guidelines and processes of selection of those prizes, to hinge and drive a scientific career based heavily or solely on prizes has the potential to be exceptionally damaging to an individual, but wholesale has immensely negative implications on science and the scientific process itself. A few years ago, I happened to read an article from an online magazine, The Scientist, that is now unfortunately behind a paywall, but you can still listen to a recording of the podcast. It came from, at that site, it is entitled, "We Should Ditch Awards in Science." And this is a theme that is becoming increasingly pervasive. Just search the phrases on Google or wherever. Stopping science prizes. Search those words, or science prizes should be stopped. And the clear challenges and the issues in the discord are apparent. And I had been thinking about this all the way since 2006, if not before, of what will my research, how it will win me a Nobel Prize. And when I'd seen that article, I took a note of it. So this is becoming prevalent, and many are feeling these effects and describing these things. And for those of you that tuned into our episode 3 entitled One Drop, you may recall the following. You want to be at a famous place. You want to work in the hottest field. Asterisk. Can you predict what field is going to be hottest in 5, 10, 20 years? You want to win that fellowship. You want to win that funding, that big shiny prize. For those of you that are hungry for these, hey, more power to you. And as Dr. Kaitiko alluded, these can put you at the center if you win them. But it also places the blazing spotlight right on you. And where can that lead? Circling back to topics of episodes 1 and 2, suffering, failure. What is driving you? The idea of wins and accolades, or the sheer drive to pursue the truth and learn something new, to even have the opportunity, the rare privilege of discovering something, no matter how small it may seem to anyone else in the world. And from that point, we exclude the challenges and all these other things of getting funding and paper published. But for anyone in that endeavor to just have the appreciation to say, I'm looking in places that maybe few have looked, maybe a lot have looked. There's something beautiful about that. And I think we all, as researchers and people that are involved in academia, but back to the non-academics here, making changes, engaging those changes, having impacts, no matter how small, moving forward and feeling victorious in that way. We need to think about this in the day-to-day more often, especially today. Let's go back to the Nobel for a moment in and of itself, and let's talk about Alfred Nobel. Some might not know about, but he was the father of the Nobel Prize, obviously. They won't be surprised at him being coined the Merchant of Death, since he was the inventor of dynamite and many other explosives, but so much more. And ironically, his prize has become rather explosive, honestly. These are his prizes, and they were meant to be granted to those who confer the greatest benefit on humankind. But today, let's think about that spotlight and think of some of the names that were famous, but now infamous after winning this prize of all prizes for various reasons. I don't have time to go into details. You can look them up. First, James Watson, as an example, and not merely because Rosalind Franklin was robbed of her data and her share of the prize. Another one from my realm, Timothy Hunt. Another person recently, Greg Semenza, 2019 winner in medicine or physiology, over the past few years having 13 papers retracted. And yes, Nobel Prize winners have had some papers retracted. He's in the lead, I believe, at this point. When these scientists are elevated to being heroes, then idols, and then that spotlight burns even brighter. And the intrigue and scrutiny Because isn't this human nature? And with the sign of the times today, seemingly a pastime for so many that want to bring the spoilers. It's a full-time job now to analyze data, look at old papers, look at every image that was ever provided, look at all the data. Don't forget, that spotlight's on you. People are out there to get you. And you win these types of awards, you get this type of recognition. I just hope people followed that path and pursued the truth rather than trying to paint the truth as what they want. I mean, that's where we are now. But even beyond the stars fallen, due sometimes to their own lack of humanity, the ongoing struggles that continue, one including patent battles over who has the rights to CRISPR. Now, for non-academic folks, you might have heard this. This is a molecular technology that has been thrust big time for research in medicine because it brings to light possibilities and potential and the capabilities to be able to edit DNA sequences, maybe fix mutations, and hence modify genes right within cells. And that's big. There's so much work to be done. There's so much distance to be covered. Nevertheless, a Nobel in Chemistry was awarded in 2020 to Jennifer Doudna and Emmanuelle Charpentier, 2 of only 8 women, 8, that have ever been awarded a chemistry Nobel Prize. And by the way, yes, Marie Curie, for those of you that might have been thinking of her, yeah, she's one of the 8 and she won 2. But other than her, there have only been 7 other people that are women. The battles go on leading up to the Nobel Prize and after the Nobel Prize. And let's not forget all of the people below those folks that won those prizes, and the blood and the sweat and the tears and the pain and the rejection and just everything we've discussed that far. And the question is, who gets left out? Who gets boxed out? These are really heavy questions. And that's also why, what is our priority? What matters most as we try to pursue these endeavors and try to make the world a better place and maybe actually have a positive impact on humanity? As we wrap up today's episode, we've already alluded to research areas and topics and the fact that the bias of what is hot for a variety of reasons is not what everybody studies, nor is it what a majority of researchers are pursuing. Again, this is not what makes us unique and leverages the diversity, the whole array of interests and curiosities that we each have for where and when and how things in our world of science and technology work and operate. For anyone that listens to somebody else's science, even if it isn't their thing, right? It's not their favorite topic, but yeah, my friend works in this particular area. Take a pause and have a moment and just appreciate their love and their interest. It isn't your interest, and that's good, but it's the diversity and the mix of the curiosities of all of us as scientists. And to be blunt with all of you listening, for your own curiosities and you're interested in understanding how things work in the world, in medicine and life, that's the fuel that makes all this move forward. Is it not a truth, your truth, that your prize is the passion and pursuit of asking those questions you are so driven to answer? If it isn't, maybe not yet, then this is something to think about. Finding that prize being within what you are and what you're doing. And if you're so entrained on shooting towards that prize, getting those awards, being at the famous places, build it on the truth. And as you move forward, but the fuel that drives success and in research is that F word that we call failure. So how can you balance these things out? And of all the times in the world, and most likely to be discussed later, one more thing about you. Maybe you don't study CRISPR. Maybe you don't research neurologic diseases or possible cures for cancer. And maybe you don't study artificial intelligence. And maybe you don't use those tools yet. Maybe someday, even if not soon. But mark my words, no artificial intelligence will ever replace you. The systems upon systems upon systems upon systems, starting back billions of years ago, when our predecessors' existence would barely even count as a single cell, to simply reflect and daydream upon all that has led to what we are today. And this is me speaking as a biologist. All right, so don't let the hype and overpromise of one or more tools that indeed could help us observe and identify patterns and gain some information from a whole mess of data, or maybe make our lives a bit easier, maybe make it a bit simpler, possibly even make our lives a bit more fun. Don't ever make you convince yourself that you are any less valuable, that the whole of you could possibly be broken down, fragmented into anything that could come close to what makes you infinitely more valuable beyond a simple sum of those fragments, those parts. Do all you can to stay true on that path to finding yourself. And inside there is the prize for which we should all be aspiring. And with that, thanks so much for joining me today. And I hope you look forward to our next episode that will be released in a week's time. No matter on which platform you heard today's episode, if you enjoyed it and want to hear more, please subscribe, follow, like, and share. Set your notifications to let you know that the next fresh episode is ready for you to dig in. All of you, keep building up your courage, hang in there, and keep your head up. We'll talk to you again soon. Continuing 30 years of experience with stories in and beyond the academic realm, Antithesis is a podcast that will take these perspectives and philosophies and pull them, along with you, the student, the researcher, the innovator, the educator, into the sunlight. Join us for some firsthand experiences, insights from inside and outside academia, and perspectives that are aimed at redefining the conventions of academia and your training, with the aim of helping you reorient your compass and strengthen you on your journey forward, or to recover and grow from those times past. We'd love to have you follow us and tune in weekly. If you have a topic you'd like discussed or a challenge you are facing you want to share, email us at allsystemsgo@gmail.com. That is ALLSYST3MSGO@gmail.com.